"Oh, well, send me the keys to the keep, mother, immediately." His demand sliced through my heart like a shard of obsidian ice. The ultimate betrayal had arrived, wearing my son's voice. The sun, a fiery orange jewel sinking into the Hudson Highlands, cast long, sepia shadows across the library floor. I, Elara Hawthorne, 62 years young but feeling the weight of centuries, stood perfectly still, the antique telephone receiver pressed tightly against my ear. The world outside, usually a symphony of evening peace, the rustle of old oak trees, the distant mourn of a foghorn, had suddenly gone silent, replaced by the chilling echo of my son's words. "We are married now, Mother. Seraphina and I need the Gilded Keep for our official wedding photo shoot and an exclusive reception. We require access immediately. Please send the security codes and the main gate key to our handler by tomorrow morning." Married. Not a happy tear, not a shared glass of champagne, not a frantic, joyful call, but a blunt, cold demand for the Gilded Keep. That name, the name of the majestic, granite-hewn manor house that defined our family's entire legacy, was the only thing my son, Alistair, had deemed worthy of mentioning. "Alistair," I managed, the single syllable escaping my throat like dry autumn leaves. My voice, usually a steady contralto, was now merely a whisper of shock. "You got married? When? Where? And Seraphina? Who is Seraphina?" I had given this boy everything. I had nurtured him in the shadow of his brilliant late father, the world-renowned architect and historian, Arthur Hawthorne. I had shielded him from the pressures of wealth, encouraged his every fleeting hobby, and stood by him through years of self-imposed uncertainty. And yet this, the most significant step in his 35 years, was executed in total contemptuous secrecy. Alistair scoffed, the sound tinny and dismissive over the line. "Last weekend, Mother. A small, intimate ceremony in Paris. It was perfect. And Seraphina is my wife. You will love her. She's an international art consultant, a real visionary. But that's not the point. The point is the keep. She needs the aesthetic. You know, for her brand. We plan to be there for at least a month, perhaps longer, getting everything ready for the winter gala season." A month. In the keep, with a total stranger, the Gilded Keep. The very name resonated with history. It was built in the 1880s by an industrial titan, then rescued and lovingly restored by my Arthur 20 years ago. It was his masterpiece, a fortress of stone and slate that contained his vast library, his drafting rooms, his soul. For me, it was the sanctuary where I had laughed, grieved, and ultimately found the strength to carry on after Arthur's passing 10 years prior. The estimated value, floating somewhere above $100 million, was secondary to its profound, irreplaceable meaning. It was our family's anchor to time, its physical manifestation of permanence, and my son, my only son, was treating it like a rented backdrop for a new socialite's brand. My initial shock began to crystallize into something far more dangerous, a ferocious, protective determination. The demand was too bold, the secrecy too absolute, the urgency too manufactured. This was not the request of a happy, newly married man. This felt like a hostile takeover. I moved from the library window to the great mahogany desk where Arthur had once worked. My fingers traced the intricate carving of a griffin, the Hawthorne crest, etched into the wood. "Be strong, Elara. Be the keeper." "Alistair," I said, my voice regaining its steel, its doctoral precision. "I am delighted for you. But you are asking for the keys to a historically landmarked building, not a summer rental. And to do so without an introduction, without even an invitation to your wedding, is frankly insulting." "Oh, cut the melodrama, Mother," he snapped, revealing the entitlement I had long tried to deny. It was a spontaneous thing. And besides, you know how stressful planning a wedding with you would have been? We skipped the fuss. Seraphina simply requires the space. She's an artist, Mother. She needs the inspiration of the keep. Think of it as a belated wedding gift. Send the keys. Please don't be difficult. Don't be difficult. The phrase was a match struck on dry tinder. Difficulty, I realized, was what he would soon receive. I heard the thinly veiled threat beneath the polite veneer. He was bypassing me, demanding a piece of my life, my sanctuary, my grief. "I understand, darling," I murmured, shifting my tactic instantly, from confrontation to compliance. If they wanted a gift, I would deliver one that would scorch their carefully constructed facade. A wedding gift, of course. How thoughtless of me. "I shall prepare something truly unforgettable for you both." I paused, injecting the word unforgettable with a low, potent venom that I hoped, but doubted, he would recognize. "Do not worry about the keys, Alistair. I will handle everything. Congratulations to you both. I shall call you back shortly." I hung up, the sharp clack of the receiver echoing in the vast, silent room. My hand was trembling, but my resolve was rock solid. I looked out at the twilight descending over the keep. I knew, instinctively, that this new Seraphina Vance was not a romantic partner for my son. She was an architectural wrecking ball aimed straight at the heart of the Hawthorne legacy. My first thought was not of tears, but of defense. I needed information. I needed a strategy. And I needed the best, most discreet operative in the state. I walked over to the safe behind Arthur's portrait, my heels clicking deliberately on the slate floor. I pulled out a small, worn leather address book, not for social calls, but for emergencies only. I flipped to the section marked with the Roman numeral 3, Mr. Thorne, my private investigator. He was the shadow I rarely used, but when I did, he brought the light of cold, hard truth. My son had initiated a game of chess, using a piece of the Hawthorne family that was not his to move. Now, I, Elara Hawthorne, the keeper of the flame, would make the first countermove. It would be devastatingly elegant, completely unexpected, and driven by a maternal fury hotter than any summer sun. I would protect my legacy, even if it meant sacrificing the illusion of my happy family life. The clock had started ticking, and I knew I had less than 24 hours before they arrived to stake their spurious claim. I wouldn't just deny them the keys. I would deliver a truth that would shatter their entire foundation. The battle for the Gilded Keep, and for my son's soul, had begun. My call to Mr. Thorne was brief, efficient, and devoid of the emotional chaos churning inside me. He was a man who dealt only in facts, and facts were exactly what I needed to cut through the gilded lies Alistair had just delivered. "Elara." Thorne's voice was a low, steady rumble, the kind that promised quiet competence. "It's been too long. What can I do for you?" "Thorne," I replied, my gaze sweeping across the vast wood-paneled library, a room that whispered of intellectual devotion and permanence. "I need a crash course in a woman named Seraphina Vance. High-profile supposed art consultant, married my son Alistair sometime last weekend. I need everything. Financials, background, family, social history, and I need to know her true intentions regarding the Hawthorne estate, specifically the Gilded Keep." I stressed the name of the house, letting the weight of its significance hang in the air. Thorne understood. He had worked for Arthur and me before, dealing with intellectual property disputes and the occasional press frenzy. He knew the difference between a property and a monument. "Alistair?" he questioned gently, a hint of surprise in his tone. "Alistair is compromised," I admitted, the admission tasting like ash. "He has made a grave mistake. My instinct, Thorne, is never wrong. This woman is a predator." "Understood, Mrs. Hawthorne. Seraphina Vance, art consultant, newly married to Alistair Hawthorne. I'll start now. Give me 12 hours. I'll send a secure dossier." With that, the connection was severed. I was alone again, but no longer paralyzed. The process of defense had begun, and that sense of action was a small, fragile relief. I walked the length of the library, my hands clasped tightly behind my back. The library alone was worth its weight in history, lined with leather-bound volumes collected over 3 generations. Every book, every scroll, every ancient map had been Arthur's passion. The Gilded Keep was not just stone and mortar. It was a curated memory palace. My thoughts drifted back to 10 years ago, to the raw, visceral pain of losing Arthur. My brilliant husband, the man who saw beauty in every chipped cornice and faded fresco, died suddenly, leaving me alone with our children, Alistair and his younger sister Dahlia. Alistair had never truly recovered from the loss of his father's immense shadow. He carried a heavy burden of expectation, the heir to a genius. But instead of channeling that pressure into creation, he had drifted. There was the failed startup, the brief, disastrous attempt at venture capital, the endless succession of expensive, passionless pursuits. He was charming, intelligent, but tragically lacking in the deep foundational purpose that defined Arthur. And now, this. Marrying a woman in secret who immediately demanded the crown jewel of the Hawthorne empire. I remember Arthur standing on the vast curved terrace of the keep, overlooking the mist-shrouded river below. "Elara," he had said, his voice resonant with love and conviction. "This place is a responsibility, not a possession. It must be protected not just for our children, but for the future of architecture. It is a lesson in permanence, darling. Promise me you will always be its fiercest guardian." "I promise, Arthur," I whispered now, leaning against the cold stone of the fireplace mantel. That promise was my steel spine. It was the only way I knew how to honor his memory. I thought of Dahlia, my sweet, grounded Dahlia, a conservationist who lived simply in Vermont, far from the suffocating glamour of New York society. She, too, loved the keep, but saw it as a historical treasure, not a private playground. Alistair, however, had always viewed the keep as an economic liability, an outdated relic that restricted his ability to leverage his inheritance. I realized then the horrifying potential of Seraphina's influence. She wouldn't just use the house, she would encourage Alistair to monetize it, to strip its soul bare for profit. She was the destructive force Alistair, in his weakness, needed to justify his latent resentment of his father's legacy. I moved to the formal drawing room, a space Arthur had designed to feel like a neo-classical temple. My fingers brushed against the smooth, cold surface of a marble bust, a Roman emperor Arthur had acquired on our honeymoon. My mind was now working like a forensic accountant, coldly calculating the variables of this hostile intrusion. The variables. Alistair's financial history. Not strong. He was deeply leveraged from his failed tech venture. He needed a financial bailout. The timing. Immediate demand for a $100 million asset just days after a secret wedding. Suspect. The bride's profession. Art consultant and founder of an exclusive foundation. A perfect cover for facilitating the sale and monetization of high-value assets. The motive. Not love, but liquidity. My maternal instincts once. Clouded by hurt, sharpened into the clear, unwavering vision of a corporate strategist. This was not a family drama. This was a high-stakes, emotional acquisition attempt. I needed to secure the keep before Alistair could be manipulated into signing anything. The first step, the necessary, heartbreaking step, was to legally wall off the legacy. I had to assume the worst, that Alistair was already signing papers, perhaps unknowingly, that could compromise the house's title. I picked up the phone again, calling my estate attorney, Mr. Sterling, whose office was in the oldest, most discreet building on Wall Street. "Sterling, it's Elara. Clear your afternoon. I'm driving down now. I need an ironclad, irrevocable trust established for the Gilded Keep by the end of the day. The beneficiaries will be my two nieces, Liana and Thea, and only upon my death. Alistair will be specifically and irrevocably excluded from any control or ownership of the property, effective immediately." The weight of those words, excluding my own son from his ancestral home, felt like a physical blow. But it was a necessity. I was not doing this out of malice. I was doing this out of a desperate, powerful love, the love that protects the long-term future over the short-term emotion. My promise to Arthur, and my duty to the future generations of Hawthornes, superseded my pain. The clock had now moved from hours to mere minutes. The drive from the Hudson Valley to the discreet, limestone-clad offices of Sterling and Associates in Manhattan was a blur of high-speed determination. I barely registered the shifting autumnal colors outside. My mind was a calculating machine, running simulations of every worst-case scenario. When I arrived, Mr. Sterling, a man whose face held the quiet gravitas of 4 decades spent protecting dynastic wealth, was ready. "Elara," he greeted me, his deep, resonant voice cutting straight to the heart of the matter. "This is a radical move. Are you absolutely certain about the immediate and explicit exclusion of Alistair?" I sank into the Italian leather chair opposite his immense desk, crossing my legs with practiced composure. The tremor that ran through me was internal, a fierce shudder of resolve, not fear. "Sterling, I have never been more certain of anything in my life," I stated, pulling off my leather driving gloves. "The house is compromised. My son has, in his profound naivete, brought a wolf into the fold. If I wait one more day, he will be manipulated into signing something, a mortgage, a deed of assignment, that will forever stain Arthur's legacy." I leaned forward, my hands flat on his desk, my gaze locking with his. "I want the Gilded Keep immediately transferred into a landmark conservation trust. It is no longer a private residence to be inherited by a single individual. It is to be preserved as a cultural institution. It is Arthur's legacy, and it will be protected as such. Alistair's name must be entirely absent from the paperwork." Sterling nodded slowly, recognizing the finality in my tone. He understood that my action was not the spite of a wounded mother, but the strategic move of a fierce protector. "It will be done, Elara, but I must prepare you. This will not only cut him out of the keep, but it will significantly alter his expected inheritance. The emotional fallout will be colossal." "I am prepared for the collateral damage, Sterling. I cannot sacrifice the $100 million legacy, the very soul of this family, to save Alistair from a fleeting, manipulative mistake. The most valuable lesson I can teach him now is that consequences are real, and betrayal carries a steep price." While Sterling and his team began the frantic, high-stakes legal choreography necessary to secure the keep before the close of business, my phone vibrated. It was Thorne. The secure dossier had arrived. I retreated to a small, private conference room, opened the file on my tablet, and took a breath. I was preparing to face a truth that would either break my heart entirely or give me the necessary ammunition for war. What I read chilled me to the bone, transforming my suspicion into absolute, icy certainty. Seraphina Vance was a ghost. The name was a professional alias created only 18 months ago. Her real name was Tamara Jenkins, a woman with a verifiable history of operating sophisticated romantic frauds against wealthy, emotionally vulnerable men. The art consultant persona was meticulously constructed, the supposed Milan background completely fabricated. The most damning section detailed her current primary objective, the Gilded Keep. Thorne had managed to infiltrate a closed messaging group of high-end real estate developers. In it, he found numerous communications from Tamara posing as Seraphina, detailing her plan. She had been scouting the Hawthorne estate for 9 months before even meeting Alistair. Her strategy was terrifyingly simple. Marry the heir, gain executive access, use Alistair's own financial distress to justify a quick sale emergency, and then leverage the property's value with a major development firm. The firm, Apex Luxury Holdings, had already drawn up conceptual plans. The document was there, a horrifying visualization attached to Thorne's file. The beautiful, granite Gilded Keep was marked with a giant Crimson X, demolition pending. In its place, Apex planned to erect a cluster of sleek, glass and steel luxury condos and a world-class wellness spa. Arthur's work, his legacy of timeless architecture, was going to be scraped from the earth to make way for 21st century consumption. A low, guttural sound escaped my lips, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury. My pain for Alistair was eclipsed by a fierce, almost religious wrath. This was an attack on Arthur's memory, a desecration of a monument. It was the ultimate unforgivable sin against the Hawthorne name. Tears, hot and sudden, finally welled up, not for the loss of my son's faith, but for the planned, violent murder of the keep. I stared at the crimson X over the beautiful stone drawing. No, never. The urgency in my body doubled. I instructed Sterling to not only finalize the trust, but to immediately file a public notice with the county clerk's office. A notice of intent to designate landmark status, a powerful legal maneuver that would freeze any attempts at modification or sale for at least 1 year. This would ensure the trust was properly established without interference. This wasn't just defense anymore. It was preemptive strike. I knew then that the wedding gift had to be delivered not just to Alistair, but to Tamara Jenkins, Seraphina. She needed to see that her entire operation had been mapped, analyzed, and systematically dismantled by the one person she had underestimated, the mother who loved fiercely enough to fight dirty. Leaving Sterling's office, I felt a shift in my core. I was no longer Elara the grieving widow, or Elara the indulgent mother. I was Elara the executioner, fueled by a powerful, righteous anger and the cold, hard certainty of fact. The stage was set for the most dramatic confrontation of my life, a collision between truth and the most egregious of gilded lies. The clock was ticking down to 0 hour. Back in the solitude of my own apartment, overlooking the relentless energy of Central Park, I began the meticulous preparation of the wedding gift. It was a task that required the focused precision of a bomb technician. This gift had to be more than just a legal document. It had to be a psychological weapon, a precise calibration of despair and realization, aimed at both the predator and the prey. The key to the entire presentation was the physical container. I chose a custom-made mahogany presentation box, a piece Arthur had intended for a set of rare, signed architectural sketches. It was elegant, heavy, and bespoke, exactly the kind of item Seraphina Vance would drool over. It symbolized the refined taste she desperately faked and the authenticity she fundamentally lacked. Inside, I arranged the contents with deliberate cruelty, each item chosen to deliver a specific, surgical strike to their fraudulent fantasy. Item 1. The betrayal visualized. I printed a large high-resolution copy of the Apex Luxury Holdings concept design. The image of the sleek, soulless glass condos standing where the keep's majestic granite walls should have been was a gut punch. But most importantly, I highlighted the great crimson X over Arthur's original blueprint. This was for Alistair, the stark visual proof of his wife's murderous intent toward his father's memory. Item 2. The phantom identity. A concise 2-page summary of Thorne's report. It outlined the transition from Tamara Jenkins to Seraphina Vance, detailing her history of romantic financial fraud across 3 continents, including the names of her previous wealthy marks and the financial ruin she left in their wake. This was the cold, hard, unassailable evidence of her true nature. Item 3. The final closure, the trust. This was the masterpiece of the package. I included a notarized copy of the newly established Landmark Conservation Trust. The legal language was dense, intentionally intimidating, but the conclusion was crystalline. The Gilded Keep was legally protected, untouchable, and now belonged to the future, not to any single heir. I highlighted the clause that named my nieces, Liana and Thea, as the future custodians, and the one that explicitly, mathematically, and irrevocably excluded Alistair Hawthorne from any power over the property. As I taped the crisp legal corners, I felt a sharp, almost physical pain. I was signing away my son's future inheritance, the one he had recklessly jeopardized. But the pain was quickly superseded by a profound, cold calm. I was not punishing him. I was administering a powerful, shocking dose of reality. I was protecting the legacy from him, and in the process, protecting him from Seraphina. The last item was purely personal, a handwritten note to Alistair. I used Arthur's favorite heavy cream-colored stationery. My handwriting, usually flowing and gentle, was firm, almost angular. My dearest Alistair, you sought keys to the Gilded Keep. I send you the key to the truth instead. A wedding should be built on love and transparency, not on a foundation of calculated deception. I did not choose this path. You did, when you chose secrecy and demanded access to a legacy you did not respect. The documents enclosed represent the price of that choice. The Gilded Keep is now safe, preserved for the future generations of Hawthornes who understand that the value of stone is not measured in dollars, but in the memory it holds. This is your gift. May it serve as the painful yet necessary lesson you have so desperately needed. With a mother's enduring, yet heartbroken love, Mother. I sealed the box, the satisfying click of the clasp sounding like the slamming of a final heavy door. The task was complete. The gift was ready. I arranged for a specialized, discreet courier service, one known for handling sensitive legal deliveries, to ensure the box was hand-delivered to Alistair and Seraphina's temporary address in Greenwich the following morning. There would be no electronic delivery, no chance for Seraphina to intercept and delete. This truth had to be handled, felt, and absorbed. The night that followed was the longest of my life. I couldn't sleep. I walked the empty corridors of my city apartment, a stark contrast to the sprawling complexity of the keep. I wrestled with the sheer terror of what I had done. Had I been too harsh? Had I permanently fractured the one relationship I had left? But then I would remember the crimson X on the blueprint, the cold, calculating eyes of Tamara Jenkins, Seraphina, as detailed in the photos, and the image of my husband's masterpiece being reduced to rubble. My heart hardened once more. I had chosen the harder path, the path of the protective lioness over the accommodating mother. My role was not to be liked, but to be the unwavering guardian of a sacred trust. I thought of the moment they would open the box. Seraphina, her face initially glowing with the expectation of a jewel or a massive check, would dissolve into a mask of pure, vicious rage. Alistair, initially excited by the mahogany craftsmanship, would read my note, see the X over his father's house, and feel the terrifying weight of his own profound mistake. I knew there would be a storm. A hurricane of accusations, media sensationalism, and desperate legal maneuvering. But for the first time in 3 days, I felt prepared. I had secured the keep and armed myself with the unassailable truth. The battle would be brutal, but the core, the legacy, was now safe. I was ready to face the music, however loud and discordant it might be. The courier confirmed delivery at precisely 11 o'clock the next morning. A brief digital signature appeared on my screen, Alistair Hawthorne. The die was cast. Now began the excruciating wait for the inevitable explosion. I sat in my quietest room, the sun-drenched conservatory, a space filled with delicate orchids and the smell of moist earth. I didn't try to distract myself. I forced myself to sit, breathe, and feel the raw tension that was coiling tighter and tighter in my stomach. I knew the silence would last only until they had fully processed the enormity of the contents. Seraphina, Tamara, would grasp the situation first. She, the professional predator, would instantly recognize the fatal flaw in her meticulously planned operation. She had been found out, documented, and blocked by a legal firewall she could not breach. Her initial reaction would be calculated fury, rapidly transitioning into a desperate scramble to control the narrative. Alistair, my son, would be slower to comprehend. He would read my letter, initially feel the bitter sting of rejection, the exclusion from the inheritance he took for granted, and only then, slowly, sickeningly, would the realization dawn that the woman he had secretly married was a documented fraud. The red X over his father's design would transform from a legal symbol to a stark, visual metaphor for the destruction of his own life. The call came at 11:32 a.m., less than an hour after delivery. The phone screen flashed Alistair. I watched it ring, forcing myself to count to 10 to regain the tactical high ground. I answered on the 11th ring. Alistair's voice was not hurt, but a hysterical, high-pitched roar of rage. Mother! What in God's name is this? This sick, twisted joke? You cut me out? You excluded me from the keep? You transferred everything to Liana and Thea? After everything Father and I built? How dare you? His focus, predictably, was immediately on the money, the betrayal of the inheritance, the removal of the asset. The emotional blow of the secret wedding had taught me that I did not know the man he had become, only the boy he used to be. I remained calm, my voice a low, steady counterpoint to his storm. Alistair, calm yourself. Have you looked at the entire package? Have you read the file on your wife? She is not a file, she is my wife, he screamed, and I could hear Seraphina's shrill, whispering voice in the background, likely coaching him, directing his fury. This is all lies. Fabrications! She says you did this out of jealousy because you can't bear to see me happy. Because you're trying to control me, even from beyond the grave. The familiar manipulative rhetoric, the projection of her own vices onto me. Julian, I said, using his full name, the name his father always used when discussing serious matters. I spoke with the precise, deliberate articulation of an actress delivering a final, damning monologue. The file contains more than 30 pages of documented irrefutable evidence, bank records, previous aliases, and confirmed appointments with Apex Luxury Holdings where your wife discussed the demolition of your father's masterpiece. The keep was not the prize. The land was. She was not marrying the man. She was acquiring the deed. Silence. A devastating, pregnant silence where only the frantic, hissed whispers of Seraphina could be heard in the background. She was attempting a hasty retreat, a damage control spin. Julian, look at the Apex file again. Look at the Crimson X placed over your father's last greatest work. She was going to tear it down. She was going to erase his memory for a luxury condo development. Is that what love looks like to you? The emotional tenor in Alistair's voice shifted instantly, violently, from blind fury to a fragile, terrifying uncertainty. He was no longer screaming about the exclusion. He was confronting the horrifying possibility of the betrayal. No, that can't be right, she said. She said she was arranging a historical assessment. She loves the house, Mother. She loves architecture, he stammered, the conviction draining out of him, replaced by the crushing weight of doubt. She loves the land's valuation, Alistair. That is what she loves, I corrected him mercilessly. I did not cut you out to punish you. I cut you out to protect the Gilded Keep. And now, by doing so, I have also protected you from financial and emotional ruin. She can no longer touch the house, and without the house, she no longer has a motive to touch you. I heard a sharp, aggressive snatching sound. Seraphina had grabbed the phone. Her voice, devoid of its breathy socialite charm, was now pure, unmasked venom. You vindictive, controlling old woman? You think you've won? You think a piece of paper can stop me? I have media contacts that will turn your landmark conservation trust into a global joke. I will expose your petty jealousy. I will show the world the cruel, suffocating mother who ruined her own son's happiness. She was good. She was a professional. She hit me with every toxic trope about controlling mothers. But I was ready. My years in the rarefied air of high-stakes philanthropy and cultural preservation had taught me to fight fire with ice. Tamara Jenkins, I said, using her real name for the first time. The shock of hearing her true identity, spoken by her opponent, caused a brief, telling pause on the other end. Your threat of media warfare is duly noted. But remember this. I have the irrefutable, legal, and financial documentation of your pattern of fraud, your aliases, and your conspiracy to demolish a protected historical landmark. When you go public, I will go public with the facts. And I assure you, my press statement will be far more detailed and far more damaging than your predictable narrative of the jealous mother. I delivered the final blow, my voice dropping to a near whisper. The game is over, Tamara. The house is safe. If you wish to salvage anything, including your freedom, I suggest you take your 24 hours to leave Alistair's life quietly. Otherwise, my attorney will file the appropriate criminal charges. Not for the fraud against my son, but for the attempted fraud against the Hawthorne Trust. The consequences for the latter are far more severe. I hung up. The phone in my hand felt heavy, exhausted. The explosion had passed. The tactical victory was secured, but the emotional casualty, my relationship with my son, was still lying wounded on the battlefield. I sank back into the chair, the smell of orchids suddenly overwhelming. The tears that I had held back finally came, not for the money or the house, but for the loss of my innocent son to the harsh reality of the world. The immediate aftermath was eerily silent, the kind of stillness that precedes the inevitable onslaught of a Category 5 hurricane. For a full 6 hours after my final chilling call to Tamara Jenkins, Seraphina, my phone remained quiet. This silence was, in itself, terrifying. It meant she was calculating, planning her next, more vicious move. She wasn't fleeing. She was reloading. I spent those precious hours with Mr. Sterling, preparing the second wave of defense, the public relations firewall. We drafted a precise, concise, and highly ethical statement detailing the establishment of the Gilded Keep as a landmark conservation trust. The core message was preservation, not punishment. We emphasized Arthur Hawthorne's vision and the importance of safeguarding architectural history for future generations. We deliberately omitted any mention of Alistair or the marriage, thereby starving the media of the juicy familial conflict they craved, but professionals like Seraphina rarely follow the rule book. The storm broke just before dinner. It didn't come from the news channels, but from the insidious, rapid-fire world of social media, particularly Instagram and TikTok, the very platform Seraphina used to cultivate her fake persona. A viral video was launched from a newly created, anonymous account, clearly managed by Seraphina's team. The title screamed, "The mother who ruined her son's love, millionaire matriarch blocks honeymoon, access to keep power." The video featured carefully selected, highly emotional clips. Seraphina, her face contorted in what appeared to be genuine tears, sobbed about being unjustly accused. There were clips of Alistair looking heartbroken, discussing his perfect Parisian wedding that was now destroyed by his mother's financial tyranny. The narrative was classic. The wealthy, controlling matriarch, bitter and unable to let her son grow up, weaponizing her dead husband's estate to exert cruel, suffocating authority. The comments section was immediately ablaze. "That's so toxic. Poor Alistair, she's trying to cut him off. Old money is always the cruelest money." The public, consuming the emotional, unverified content, reacted with predictable viral outrage. Seraphina was turning my strategic protection into a global narrative of my cruelty. I watched the video twice, observing the meticulously staged lighting and the carefully rehearsed tears. My hands resting on my lap were steady. I felt a surge of cold pride in my own foresight. I had anticipated this exact maneuver. I immediately called Thorne. The media counteroffensive has begun. She is using the suffocating mother narrative. I need to pivot. I'm watching it now, Elara. It's effective. Emotional currency trumps legal truth every time initially, Thorne observed clinically. What's the pivot? The pivot is the Gilded Keep itself, I declared. She has framed this as a personal, petty dispute over a house. I will reframe it as a selfless, moral stand over a monument of global significance. I need a press release that focuses only on the documents she left out of her video. I want to hit them with the X. I instructed Thorne to leak anonymously to a respected architectural journal, not a gossip rag, a single, black and white image, the conceptual blueprint from Apex Luxury Holdings, showing the beloved Gilded Keep with the ominous, terrifying crimson X marked for demolition. The accompanying anonymous caption would be simple. Is this the true intention of the Hawthorne estate's new residents? The public deserves to know what destruction lurks behind. The veil of a charity gala. This was the key, shifting the conversation from Elara is mean to A, national treasure is under threat. The public would stop seeing me as the villain and start seeing Seraphina as the vandal. While Thorne handled the leak, I focused on the one person I could not reach, who was still trapped in Seraphina's gravity, Alistair. He hadn't called back. He was likely isolated, his phone and computer controlled by his manipulative wife, convinced that I was his enemy. I knew that no amount of legal paperwork or media spinning could truly save him. Only the raw, unfiltered truth, delivered with the right emotional resonance, could break the spell. I decided to use the only channel I had left. Dahlia, Alistair's younger sister, the quiet conservationist living a peaceful life in Vermont. Far from the suffocating glamour of New York society, Dahlia was grounded, practical, and immune to superficial glamour. She was also fiercely loyal to the memory of her father. I called her, my voice thick with the emotion I had suppressed for days. Dahlia, my love, I need your strength. Alistair is in grave danger. He has married a fraud. A professional predator named Tamara Jenkins, Seraphina Vance. She has convinced him that I am the enemy and that I have unfairly excluded him from his father's legacy. I briefly explained the trust, the demolition plans, and the viral smear campaign. Dahlia was silent for a long moment. The keep? Demolition? Father would be... Heartbroken, mother. That house is sacred. Exactly, darling. Now, I need you to do something painful but necessary. I need you to go to Alistair. Not to argue the legal points, not to defend me. I need you to go there, look him in the eye, and speak the emotional truth of his father's love. He needs to see the genuine grief and concern that Seraphina is attempting to mask. My plan was to introduce a powerful, unfiltered third party, his sister, into their sealed bubble. Seraphina could manipulate him, but she couldn't manipulate the bond between siblings, especially one rooted in the shared, cherished memory of their father. Dahlia was my emotional Trojan horse. I could feel a mother's desperation settling over me, the kind that recognizes the limits of law and the limitless power of love. I had handled the money. I had handled the law. Now I had to trust my daughter to handle the heart. The battle for the keep was turning into a brutal, emotional civil war, and the next casualty could be Alistair's soul. I had protected the stone. Now I had to protect the sun. Dahlia's arrival in Greenwich was discreet, unannounced, and devastatingly effective. She drove down from Vermont in her old, reliable utility vehicle, eschewing the kind of luxury transport that would have played into Seraphina's narrative. My instruction was simple. Do not confront Seraphina. Confront the lie that was consuming your brother. She found Alistair and Seraphina in a temporary rental. A sleek, modern house that, in its sterile perfection, was the antithesis of the layered, soulful history of the Gilded Keep. The atmosphere was thick with manufactured tension, a mix of fake bridal bliss, and genuine paranoia over the legal documents I had delivered. Dahlia called me immediately after her arrival. Her voice was strained. Mother, the air in this place is poisonous. Seraphina is playing the role of the frail, betrayed wife, constantly dabbing her eyes with a silk handkerchief. Alistair is hostile. He is completely convinced you are a villain. He says you are suffocating his independence and using father's memory as a financial weapon. Hold steady, Dahlia, I urged her. Do not debate the trust or the money. Speak only of father and the history. Show him the pain the keep's loss represents. The leak to the Architectural Journal had landed with seismic force. The moment the image of the crimson X over Elara Hawthorne's final, beloved work hit the highly specialized circles of preservationists and historians, the online conversation pivoted immediately. The original viral video, the one about the mean mother, was swiftly buried under a wave of righteous, educated fury. Architectural blogs, historic preservation societies, and university departments were now sharing the Apex Luxury Holdings blueprint, demanding to know the name of the vandal who dared to plan the destruction of a building considered a masterpiece of American historical revival. Seraphina Vance's name was now attached not to chic charity, but to cultural terrorism. The pressure shifted entirely. Seraphina, the astute social climber, understood this shift instantly. It was one thing to be disliked by an old mother. It was another entirely to be loathed by the cultural gatekeepers of New York society. She needed to eliminate the cause of the leak, the truth. And the only way to do that was to discredit the documents and, failing that, silence the document's creator. I received a highly aggressive cease and desist letter from a previously unknown, third-tier law firm, threatening me with defamation and emotional distress lawsuits on behalf of Mr. and Mrs. Alistair Hawthorne. The claims were ludicrous, hyperbolic, and entirely without merit. But they served one crucial purpose. They were a desperate attempt to force me into a quiet, negotiated settlement. I immediately forwarded the document to Sterling, who merely chuckled. A paper tiger, Elara, they are terrified. We ignore it, but we prepare our final legal response, a motion to compel discovery. We will force them to produce her real financial and tax records, thereby confirming every word of Thorne's file. I agreed. The legal process was now my most powerful weapon, but I needed a personal breakthrough. That was Dahlia's mission. That evening, Dahlia, acting on my subtle advice, did not bring up the keep. Instead, she brought an old, slightly faded photo album. It was full of candid pictures of Arthur and Alistair, taken during the years they worked together on the keep's restoration. She sat next to her brother, far from Seraphina, who was pacing frantically in the kitchen, making increasingly agitated phone calls. Look, Alistair, Dahlia whispered, opening the album to a picture of their father, Arthur, his arm around a teenage Alistair, both of them covered in plaster dust, grinning triumphantly as they replaced a slate tile on the roof. Do you remember that day? Father was so proud of you. He said you had the hands of a true craftsman, not just a scholar. Alistair's eyes, hardened by days of rage and denial, softened. He looked at the image, the tangible memory of his father's love, untainted by money or demands. He always said that, Alistair murmured, his voice cracking. He wanted me to be a part of the keep, Dahlia. He wanted it all to be mine. But Alistair, Dahlia continued, her eyes glistening with genuine tears, the man you married, the woman who calls herself Seraphina, has a blueprint right now. A document, Alistair, that shows her plan to destroy that roof, to demolish the walls. She wasn't planning to live in Father's masterpiece. She was planning to turn it into rubble for a profit. She has no love for his history, only for the space his history occupies. Don't you see the difference? She took his hand, her own shaking slightly. Mother didn't cut you out to hurt you. She cut you out to save Father's soul from being annihilated by a complete stranger. You chose secrecy over family. She chose preservation over popularity. Please, just look at the evidence I brought you. Not the legal part, just the photos of Tamara Jenkins. Look at her history. Dahlia had provided the emotional key I could not. She had bypassed the financial narrative and spoken directly to the buried, vulnerable love Alistair still held for his father. The spell, after days of emotional manipulation, had finally begun to crack. The truth, in the gentle voice of his sister, was far more piercing than any legal threat from his mother. The silence that followed was heavy with dawning, terrifying realization. The war was nearing its internal climax. The dam broke precisely 48 hours after Dahlia's visit. Alistair, having spent 2 days in a silent, agonizing internal war, finally made his choice. It was not a grand, dramatic exit, but a furtive, desperate act of a man trying to retrieve a piece of his lost soul. He called me not from the Greenwich house, but from a discreet, safe line in a library downtown. His voice was no longer accusatory or hysterical. It was hollowed out, thin and brittle with shame. Mother, I saw it! He choked out, the admission a sound of absolute defeat. Dahlia left me the full file, not just the summary, but the raw transcripts, the bank transfer histories, the previous names. Tamara Jenkins, she's not even an art consultant. She's a professional financial operative. The pain in his voice was so profound that it sliced through my hardened exterior. I closed my eyes, swallowing the lump in my throat. I had won the tactical war, but the cost to my son was devastating. Alistair, I am so sorry you had to learn this way, I whispered, allowing a sliver of my maternal grief to show. No, he corrected me sharply. Don't be sorry. Be angry at me. I was so desperate for success, so weary of being Arthur Hawthorne's son, that I fell for the first woman who made me feel relevant. I didn't see the greed in her eyes. I only saw the reflection of the success I craved. He paused, a ragged breath catching in his throat. I called Apex Luxury Holdings. They wouldn't confirm anything, but the way their representative spoke, the codes on the blueprint, it was all real, Mother. She was going to tear down the keep. She planned to erase Father's last living work. This realization was the true turning point. The knowledge that he had almost been complicit in the destruction of his father's memory wounded him far more deeply than losing an inheritance ever could. She convinced me you were the enemy, he continued, his voice trembling. She said you wanted to keep me financially dependent. When I saw the trust, I believed her. But when Dahlia made me look at the photo of Father and me on the roof, I realized the woman who claimed to love me was actively planning to murder the very memory I cherished. My moment for emotional comfort had not yet arrived. This moment required cold, clinical guidance. She is a highly skilled predator, Alistair. You are not alone. Now you must act decisively and quietly. She is still at the house, believing you are her accomplice. What do I do? He pleaded, desperate for instruction. You do nothing that will give her grounds to retaliate emotionally or legally, I instructed, my voice firm and strategic. You go back to the house. You act normal. Do not mention the file. Do not mention the keep. You simply wait for Sterling to file the motion for discovery tomorrow. That legal action will officially launch the criminal investigation into her aliases and fraudulent activities. That is the only thing that will make her run. This was the hardest part for him, the final crushing act of betrayal against the woman he had sworn to love. But it was the only safe exit. Alistair agreed, his voice a resigned murmur. He returned to the Greenwich house that evening, playing the part of the oblivious wounded husband, while in reality, he was an agent of his own devastating truth. The following morning, I received confirmation from Sterling. The motion to compel discovery and a preliminary criminal complaint targeting Tamara Jenkins, Seraphina Vance, for aggravated identity theft and conspiracy to commit financial fraud were officially filed. The documents demanded full disclosure of all bank records associated with Seraphina Vance and the shadowy Vance Art Consultancy, a request designed to expose the entire web of lies. That same afternoon, I finally got the call I had been waiting for. It wasn't Alistair. It was a hysterical, screeching Seraphina. She had been served with the legal documents. You monster! She screamed, the voice completely unhinged. You cannot do this. This is harassment. I will sue you for everything you own. I will tell the entire world about the years you ignored Alistair and drove him into my arms. Tamara, I interjected, calm as the deep ocean. I am speaking now as the trustee of the Landmark Conservation Trust and as the primary complainant in the criminal matter. Your legal defenses are frivolous. Your attempts to sue for defamation will only expose your entire ugly history in open court. The investigation into your aliases has begun. You are now facing federal and international charges. I suggest you consult a criminal defense attorney immediately. I delivered the final, crushing line that would ensure her retreat. Alistair is no longer your resource, nor is the Gilded Keep. You have 24 hours to vacate the property you are currently occupying and exit my son's life. If you are not gone by this time tomorrow, the police will be dispatched with a warrant for your arrest. I hung up, severing the final thread. The silence this time was one of absolute, total capitulation. I knew she would flee. Predators do not fight when the risk of exposure outweighs the value of the prize. She had lost the prize, and now her freedom was at stake. The keep was safe. My son was free, but the deep, ugly scars of this betrayal were only just beginning to show. The immediate consequence of my final ultimatum was swift and profoundly anticlimactic. Tamara Jenkins, alias Seraphina Vance, vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the chaos of her hastily abandoned life. She left the rented house in Greenwich within the 24-hour deadline, taking only her most expensive designer handbags and an assortment of high-end electronics. The wedding dress, the symbol of her brief, fraudulent triumph, was left discarded on the floor of the master closet, a crumpled white flag of surrender. The silence that followed her departure was heavy, not with tension but with emotional debris. Alistair called me, not to apologize but to report the facts. She's gone, Mother. She took the rental car and left a note saying she had an emergency family crisis in Milan that couldn't wait. A final pathetic lie. It is over, Alistair. You are safe, I affirmed, my voice softer now that the threat was gone. Am I? He countered, the question carrying the full weight of his despair. I am 35 years old, Mother. I secretly married a documented fraud who was plotting to destroy my father's life's work. I attacked you for trying to protect me. I let her turn me against you and Dahlia. I lost my inheritance, rightly so, and I feel hollow. His voice broke, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he sounded like my vulnerable, lost son again. It was the sound of a man confronting the ruins of his own judgment. You are not hollow, Alistair. You are merely honest now, I told him gently. The loss of the inheritance is a consequence. The realization of your mistake is a foundation. You can rebuild on honesty. You could never build anything on Seraphina's lies. I knew I couldn't just offer him a bandage. He needed surgery. He needed to process the shame, the guilt, and the profound trauma of being used as a pawn. I made 3 immediate arrangements. I had Thorne discreetly ensure that Seraphina's departure was permanent. The criminal complaint remained active, but the priority was her retreat, not her incarceration. Justice would eventually catch up, but my focus was on Alistair's healing. I arranged for Alistair to move immediately into a small, elegant carriage house on the grounds of the Gilded Keep, a neutral, separate space. He needed proximity to his roots, but he could not yet occupy the main house. He needed to earn his place back in the shadow of his father's legacy, not simply walk into it. I booked him a preliminary session with Dr. Elias Vance, a deliberate fictional irony in the name, a psychologist specializing in trauma and recovery from codependent and narcissistic relationships. Alistair reluctantly agreed to everything. His compliance was not born of love or respect, but of utter exhaustion and a desperate need for direction. His first visit to the carriage house was difficult. The keep, standing massive and silent on the bluff, was no longer a symbol of entitlement. It was a monument to his failure. He could see its granite walls, but he knew he was legally and morally locked out. I visited him a few days later. I didn't bring food or comfort. I brought a small, plain wooden box containing the remnants of his childhood. A set of old, well-loved architectural drafting tools that Arthur had given him, and a stack of letters from his college years. We sat on the small, shaded porch of the carriage house. The air was crisp, the scent of autumn leaves was heavy. The keep loomed above us, majestic and unforgiving. "Do you hate me, Mother?" Alistair finally asked, his eyes avoiding mine. The question was not about the trust. It was about the fundamental nature of our relationship. I looked at him, at the dark circles under his eyes, at the defeated slump of his shoulders. I felt the familiar maternal urge to wrap him in my arms, but I resisted. He needed truth, not smothering. "I was never angry at you, Alistair," I said, my voice measured and slow. "I was angry at the choice you made. I was angry at the way you allowed a complete stranger to weaponize your insecurity against the memory of your father. Anger is temporary. Love is eternal. But love requires boundaries." I pushed the wooden box toward him. "Your father's love for you is in that box. It's in the memory of the 2 of you covered in plaster dust, fixing that roof. The Gilded Keep is the physical manifestation of that love. And when I protected it, when I excluded you from it, I was demonstrating the only boundary strong enough to keep the wolf away from your spirit." Tears streamed down his face, silent and hot. This time they were tears of cleansing, of genuine remorse. He was not crying for the money he lost, but for the respect he had betrayed. "I almost destroyed it, Mother," he whispered, picking up an old drafting pencil. "But you didn't. And now, you must spend the next chapter of your life proving that the man who almost destroyed it is capable of becoming the man who will help preserve its meaning. Your journey back to yourself starts now, Alistair, and it begins with true humility and hard work." I stood up, leaving him with the wooden box and the daunting, beautiful presence of the Gilded Keep. My work as a protector was done. Now my work as a guide had begun. The keep was safe, and the long, arduous process of rebuilding a fractured family bond was finally underway. The next 6 months were characterized by a quiet, grueling process of recovery, both familial and legal. The high-wire theatrics of Seraphina's brief reign were replaced by the monotonous, unyielding grind of bureaucracy and self-reflection. The legal machine, once set in motion, was relentless. The criminal investigation into Tamara Jenkins, Seraphina, unveiled a massive international network of financial fraud. She was not a lone predator. She was a highly trained operative in a group that specialized in isolating and dismantling high-net-worth heirs. The FBI and international authorities took over the case, seeking to track her through the shell corporations Thorne had initially discovered. Her attempted fraud against the Hawthorne Trust was just one small, greedy thread in a much larger, darker tapestry. For me, this confirmation was a powerful balm. It absolved Alistair of some of the personal blame. He hadn't just fallen for a liar. He had been targeted and professionally victimized. Meanwhile, Alistair settled into the small carriage house, a humble stone structure that contrasted starkly with the sprawling mansion above him. He started regular sessions with Dr. Vance, beginning the difficult work of dismantling the years of performance, shame, and unaddressed grief over his father that had made him such an easy target. He found solace, oddly enough, in the vast, imposing presence of the Gilded Keep. He didn't trespass onto the main property, but he began to walk the circumference of the estate every evening. He would stand at the edges of the gardens, looking up at the high slate roof and the towering chimneys, not with resentment, but with a growing sense of awe and responsibility. He was seeing the keep not as an inheritance to be sold, but as a masterpiece to be studied and served. One particularly cold afternoon, Alistair found me on the main terrace, overseeing the meticulous conservation work being performed on one of Arthur's rare marble friezes. I was wearing thick gloves and a work apron, a far cry from the society matron he was used to seeing. He approached me tentatively. "Mother, I wanted to tell you about my therapy sessions." I straightened up, wiping my hands on my apron. "You don't owe me an update, Alistair. That is your work, not mine." "No, I owe it to myself," he corrected me, the confidence in his voice a welcome change. Dr. Vance made me realize that my pursuit of Seraphina wasn't about love. It was about escaping the pressure of being my father's son. I thought if I could achieve the level of wealth and notoriety that Seraphina promised, I would finally step out of Arthur's shadow. I was using her as a tool to destroy my identity so I could rebuild a false one. When I saw the X on the blueprint, it wasn't just a plan to demolish the house. It was a plan to demolish the real me. His eyes, clear and honest, finally met mine. "Thank you, Mother. You didn't just save the keep. You saved me from myself. The trust was the most profound act of love and protection you could have possibly executed. It was the apology I had desperately needed. Not for the secret wedding, but for the misplaced trust and the accusation of cruelty. The pain in my heart, a constant dull throb since the demand for the keys, finally began to subside. Your father would have been proud of this realization. Alistair, I told him, allowing my emotion to surface. He didn't want you to be a copy of him. He wanted you to be honest with yourself. This truth. This is the greatest wealth you could inherit." The legal proceedings regarding the divorce were finalized shortly thereafter. Seraphina, unable to be served in person, was divorced in absentia on the grounds of fraud and abandonment. The brief, ill-fated marriage was legally scrubbed from the records, a dark footnote erased from the Hawthorne saga. A small, significant event occurred that evening. Dahlia drove down from Vermont, bringing a freshly baked apple pie, the kind Arthur had loved. We sat together in the humble carriage house kitchen, mother, son, and daughter, sharing a meal that was simple, honest, and profoundly real. Alistair, for the first time, asked not what he could take from the keep, but what he could give to it. "Mother, the trust is established. The house is a conservation piece. But it still needs an executive director for the public programming," he said, looking at me, his eyes full of purpose. "My finance background is worthless. but my father taught me every blueprint of that house. I know its history, its structure, its weaknesses. I want to spend the next year studying preservation law and curatorial management. I want to become the steward of the keep. My heart soared. This was the true redemption. Not just forgiveness, but the proactive embrace of responsibility. The son who had tried to flee his father's shadow was now voluntarily stepping back into it, ready to dedicate his life to protecting the very legacy he had almost destroyed. The keep was safe, and now, so was its rightful heir. The long night of betrayal was finally yielding to the dawn of renewal. The year that followed Alistair's commitment was the most meaningful of my later life. It was a period of deliberate, quiet, and profound healing. Alistair did not just study, he immersed himself entirely in the world of architectural preservation. He enrolled in a specialized certification program, spending his days poring over Arthur's original drafting notes, studying the complex maintenance schedules of the old manor, and engaging with the very architectural critics who had once lauded his father's work. He approached his new role not as an executive, but as a disciple. He was meticulous, humble, and entirely focused on service. The relationship between Alistair, Dahlia, and me blossomed, rooted in a newly discovered bedrock of honesty. Dahlia, recognizing her brother's genuine change, moved her conservation nonprofit to the Hudson Valley. They began working together, Alistair handling the structural preservation and budgeting for the keep, and Dahlia focusing on the surrounding ecological restoration of the estate's land. The Gilded Keep was no longer a single building. It was an entire thriving ecosystem of family effort. My own role transitioned from fierce protector to proud mentor. I worked closely with Alistair, teaching him the intricacies of the trust, the political landscape of landmark preservation, and most importantly, the philosophy behind Arthur's work. The keep must tell a story. Alistair, I would often tell him as we reviewed budget projections, it must tell the story of permanence in a world obsessed with the temporary. That is its value far beyond the dollar sign. One afternoon, I called a special meeting with Mr. Sterling, Dahlia, and Alistair. We gathered in the grand parlor of the keep, a room that now felt vibrant, filled with the energy of renewed purpose rather than dusty history. I stood before them, holding the original trust document. 1 year ago, I made a difficult decision that secured the Gilded Keep forever. I designated my nieces, Liana and Thea, as the future beneficiaries, entirely excluding Alistair. It was the necessary weapon to defeat Seraphina. That threat is now over. I looked directly at Alistair. His face was etched with maturity and a quiet understanding of sacrifice. Alistair, you have proven that the man who almost destroyed this legacy is now the one most worthy of preserving it. You have demonstrated that you understand that the keep is a responsibility, not a right. You have not just asked for forgiveness. You have earned it through tireless, humble effort. I signaled to Sterling, who presented a new, single-page amendment. Under the terms of the original document, Sterling announced, his voice carrying the full weight of the law, as the original settler, Elara Hawthorne retains the right to designate an executive steward for the trust, granting them immediate, non-transferable authority over the management, preservation, and public programming of the Gilded Keep. I looked at my son, a rush of love, pride, and relief washing over me. Alistair, I offer you this position. You will not inherit the building. It will forever belong to the trust and the public, but you will inherit its purpose. You will be the keep's first, and most important, executive steward. Do you accept this sacred responsibility? Alistair didn't hesitate. He didn't reach for the pen or the document. He simply looked at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears of profound gratitude. I accept, Mother. I promise I will not fail the keep, or father, or you, again. He signed the document with a hand that was now steady, certain, and true. It was a signature not of ownership, but of commitment. The exclusion was officially over, replaced by a higher form of inclusion, the inclusion into purpose. The keep, once a battlefield, was now a symbol of renewal. The family was whole again, stronger, and bonded by the shared experience of loss and redemption. The saga of Seraphina, the shock, the anger, the pain, had culminated not in tragedy, but in the profound, unexpected triumph of a mother's fierce protection and a son's hard-won redemption. We had learned that the most valuable thing we own is not what we can sell, but what we fight to protect. And the greatest inheritance is the purpose we find in guarding the memories of those we love. The final chapter of this tumultuous saga unfolded not in a courtroom or a dramatic confrontation, but on a quiet afternoon, exactly 2 years after the infamous secret wedding. The Gilded Keep was open. Not as a private residence, but as the Elara Hawthorne Center for Architectural Preservation. Visitors walked the stone halls, studied Arthur's blueprints in the newly curated library, and gazed upon the majesty of the Hudson River, exactly as he had intended. The house was finally fulfilling its highest purpose, serving as a lesson in permanence. I stood on the terrace, watching Alistair and Dahlia lead a group of architecture students. Alistair, dressed sharply but functionally, spoke with passion and authority about the structural integrity of the century-old walls. He was no longer the lost heir. He was the master of the keep, living out a destiny far more meaningful than any luxury condo could ever offer. The fate of the predator, Tamara Jenkins, Seraphina, was revealed in a brief, one-column article tucked away in the financial news. She had been apprehended in a small, non-extradition country while attempting to set up a new fraudulent identity. The charges were international and severe. She received a long, devastating sentence, a final, absolute victory for justice, proving that calculated greed rarely triumphs over determined truth. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, only a deep sense of relief that the threat to my family and my husband's memory was truly, irrevocably over. That evening, the family, Alistair, Dahlia, my 2 nieces Liana and Thea, and I, gathered in the small original kitchen of the keep, a space Arthur had deliberately left untouched. We were marking the 2nd anniversary of the day the keys were demanded. Dahlia raised her glass of sparkling cider. To the keep, and to the woman who taught us that stone is stronger than gold. We drank. Liana and Thea, future custodians of the trust, were now young women who understood the immense responsibility they would one day inherit. Alistair looked at me, his eyes full of the quiet joy of a life reclaimed. "Mother, do you remember that day? The moment I first demanded the keys?" "I remember every chilling word, darling," I said, a faint, sad smile touching my lips. It was the darkest moment. But sometimes, the greatest light is cast only after the greatest storm. The educational takeaway. Our family's journey from near destruction to profound renewal holds a vital, universal lesson. Legacy is not passive. It is active. It is not something you merely inherit. It is something you must fiercely protect and continuously earn. For every great work, a house, a business, a dream, there will always be a Seraphina, a professional predator looking to dismantle it for quick profit. The greatest armor you can wear is not wealth, but truth, wisdom, and the courage to set unbreakable boundaries. We learn that love, especially maternal love, is not about enablement. It is about providing the harsh, necessary consequences that force a loved one to confront their own weakness and reclaim their integrity. The keep is safe not because of its walls, but because one mother had the courage to tell her son that the price of truth is always worth more than the cost of a lie. We emerged from that crisis stronger and wiser, with a renewed appreciation for what truly matters, not the millions of dollars the keep is worth, but the meaning it holds. Our future is now secure, built on a foundation of honesty and shared purpose. The fight for the Gilded Keep was brutal, but it taught us that the greatest inheritance is purpose, not property. My son demanded the keys to his future. I gave him the key to the truth, and he was finally set free. The pain was real, the betrayal was deep, but the redemption was absolute. If this story of tough love, high-stakes protection, and a family's profound renewal touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel, share this powerful lesson with the person who needs to hear it most, and join us next week when we reveal the heartbreaking letters Arthur left behind for his son. Mother is the ultimate guardian. Always vigilant, always loving, always victorious. Click here to watch more.